Welcome, Slayer the Alchemist. We're back with another heavy hidden gems from the 70s. I have my good heavy rock, heavy 70s friend here, Greeno. He's back with me to share some more hidden gems for you. Greeno is a big fan of all kinds of music, metal and heavy 70s. You can catch him off on the Man Cave of Doom. I'm going to leave a link in the description down below. That's a great show. I've been on there where just a bunch of dudes get together and they just talk about whatever pops into their head.
It's metal, a free for all.
Yeah, it's a free for all, but it's a blast and it's a lot of fun. So I will leave a link in the description down below for the Man Cave of Doom, so everybody can check that out. Right. Okay, so we're back here with more heavy hidden gems from the 70s. We've been talking about, going down rabbit holes. And one thing that has really helped me with discovering some of this music is when I got on Spotify. And Spotify, I don't know if you're on Spotify, but Spotify will recommend you go to an artist page and then it'll give you 7 or so bands that are similar to them. And it's usually pretty good. And on top of that, people make playlists. So if you type in heavy 70s, proto metal, stuff like that, you'll find people that'll have playlists with, 50 bands inside the playlist, and you can go down. And so I would go down these rabbit holes of I'd find a band I like, I'd look for a similar artist, I'd like that band, that would lead to a playlist that I'd go down, I'd discover a band from there and then go back. And not all this stuff is on there because some of this stuff was released on small labels, and even when it's been reissued, it's on a smaller label. But there is a lot of it, and maybe in the description down below, I have a playlist, a heavy 70s playlist that I'm going to leave in the description down below, and it has all the stuff that we talk about on here. If it's on Spotify, it'll be in there, and plus a ton of other stuff, and all the stuff that I really like. I kind of weeded through, there's certain bands that people talk about that get mentioned that maybe aren't really what I'm into. We've mentioned already the psych stuff. I'm not a big psych fan, so that kind of stuff I tend to avoid that stuff, but people might dig the playlist.
So YouTube's kind of the same way. Like when I first started checking these bands out, same deal. You go to pull up Sir Lord Baltimore and it's going to pull up Bang and 6 other similar bands, so it's same kind of deal. And of course 10 more bands that have nothing to do with what you're checking out.
Right. And people make playlists on YouTube too, heavy stuff. And we're going to really, for this series, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be leaving a link in the description for either a song or the entire album of whatever we talk about on the particular episode. So if people are unfamiliar with the bands, you can click on those links. You take you to a video to give you a taste of the bands that we're talking about.
Right on.
All right. So what do you got for your pick here today?
This is another one that, as you can see behind you, where you have Leaf Hound and Bang and all that, that's the upper echelon or the B level that we've talked about. And some of those, like you find an original Leaf Hound, you're going to pay for it. You know what I mean? Oh, yeah. Luckily, we have the reissues. But I've been kind of starting out here, pulling out stuff that isn't, if you find it, it's going to be cheap, but it's definitely worth picking up, And this episode, I have Hydra. Was it Rock the World? And this was like, this is a little bit later. This is 77. Now, Hydra had kind of been around. This was their 3rd album. But on this album, they changed a little bit. They lost a member and a bass player, and one of the guitar players switched to bass. So we went from 4 to power trio, right? Wow. So here we go. This album's killer, man. It's that heavy blues, but it also has a bit of a southern thing to it, and it's just kind of funny. Just as a side note here, you have your bass player who was originally a guitar player, drummer, but on the back you have 2 guitar players and a drummer, so it's like, okay, whatever. But side 1, second track, Wasting Time. Holy crap, man. What just a killer definition of heavy 70s to me, late heavy 70s now. If you get a chance, find that on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get your internet stuff. If you want to check this out, and crank it up. That song sounds fantastic, just cranked up. It's just a killer track. But overall, just a good album. And like I say, this was their third album. They were out of Atlanta, so they have a little bit of that. There's a touch of Southern something to them. I don't know what it is, but definitely worth checking out. And I have their second album, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I've been looking for the first one. I just never came across it. But I would definitely like to pick up the rest of their stuff. But that's basically what I have. And what was this on? Polydor.
Yeah.
And like I say, go ahead.
I was going to say I'd never heard of that band, and when you mentioned them, I did check them out, and it was cool. And you can tell it's as you move to the late '70s, this stuff starts getting a little more melodic, a little more
produced, and
yeah,
it's not as Wild West by the time we get here. Better bands are getting into the studio, they're getting into some production, but they still have that heavy flavor to them. And the psych's gone, all that craziness is gone by the time you get 76, 77 and on.
Yeah. It gets more melodic, and you're starting to inch towards like AOR melodic type rock. Once you add, by the time you get to the late '70s, you start seeing some bands adding keyboards, and you're getting 79, 80. You're getting these sort of melodic AOR type rock bands, which I have a soft spot for those type of bands.
Oh, yeah.
Like sort of melodic radio rock, still heavy guitar, distorted guitar, but maybe there's some keyboards in it. There's like great vocals, vocal harmonies, and stuff like that. And
well, that's interesting. I mean, I wonder, like you putting it that way, some of those bands, those heavy '70s bands coming into the late '70s, did you have like a split where you got some of the bands went AOR, some of the bands went towards the heavier metal sound,
Yeah, I'd have to think about that. Some of the bands that were sort of on that cusp of, they've got the distorted guitar and everything, but yeah, they don't go sort of the metal way. They stay more with the keyboards and the Foreigner, that type of like early Foreigner. Early Foreigner was had some heavy moments. They just had the keyboards in it. Or who was another band that there was some other band that was on the tip of my tongue that I was thinking of that had that kind of like keyboards in the sound, melodic. Then sort of moving into the well-produced type of stuff.
And then it's interesting, like when you come out of the '70s into the '80s, you get like an early heavy '80s. It's not metal and it's not AOR, but when you're talking like those early '80s Sammy Hagar and
bands like Montrose and stuff like that, kind of like melodic heavy rock. It definitely doesn't have the psych or the jammy or the experimental feel of like the stuff from the early to the mid '70s. It's still blues based, but it's more, a little bit more focused. The songs are there, the vocals are a little bit better. You've got some harmonies, you've got better produced records. Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, the opposite of that kind of stuff is this Randy Holden, Population 2. This is one that often when you see this advertised, they'll say it's the first doom metal record. This came out in 1970. That's pushing it a little, but I see where they're coming from with that. Randy Holden played with Blue Cheer for one record. The album called New Improved, I believe is what the name of that Blue Cheer record is. Yeah, he was on like the second side of the record. I think he didn't play on the entire album. This is very stripped down. The production is pretty simple. Let's put it that way. It's basically like one guitar. Holden also plays bass on it, but you can't really hear the bass, or unless it's just playing right along with the guitar. It's got a real kind of open, cavernous type sound to it. a lot of slow riffs. That's probably where the doom metal thing comes from. Some long songs on here, like Fruit and Icebergs. It's actually sort of broken into three parts: Fruit and Icebergs, Between Time, and then you're back to Fruit and Icebergs. It's sort of this song that's just sort of moving along like an iceberg, like a glacier. Think it reminds me a little bit of Jimi Hendrix, Voodoo Child, not Voodoo Child Slight Return, not the fast one. On Electric Ladyland, there's that slow version of Voodoo Child that's really kind of long, and it's like, it's just real kind of slow and plodding. So that's kind of what this is. I think Blue Cheer also, I mean, he has a connection with Blue Cheer. So that heavy blues, but just really slowed down and real kind of primitive sounding. The guitar is, this picture of all these amplifiers in there. It just sounds like he's, playing through like 10 stacks, just like cranked up to 10, it's just massive guitar sound. There isn't, maybe if I made another reference, maybe like Mountain, in the sense that like the way Leslie West has a big sound, and there isn't a whole lot of like soloing on this. I mean, there is, but it's more like in kind of a simple blues kind of way, big bends and stuff like that. But it's, for its time, it's a really heavy record. If you didn't know any better, somebody might think this is some sort of modern stoner doom thing, one of these like real slow moving, big hanging chords, big cavernous sort of pounding drums like that, the way that some of these modern stoner bands try to sound retro. They're playing through vintage tube amps and stuff like that. Well, this kind of has that sound to it. The songs are good. They're not anything mind blowing. It's really all about the riffs here and kind of the sonic assault of this massive, heavy, thick guitar sound. And again, it's a real sort of simple recording. It just sounds like one guitar. Can't really hear the bass and the drums. It's not like, there's not like layered guitars. There's no keyboards. There's no like intricate little bells and whistles or anything. It's a pretty stripped down, sounds like it was probably done pretty live. This is a reissue, of course, but Randy Holden was, I guess, involved in this reissue. So it sounds really nice. It's actually got its signed down here at the bottom. I guess it's a limited edition thing, but you can get this still for a really good price. I probably got this like 6 months ago or something.
I gotta grab that, man. I just kind of, that record when it got reissued, a lot of the guys into the 70s stuff was all over that. It's like, man, it's on the list. I got to pick that up, and I just haven't got around to it yet. I got to get one.
Yeah, so definitely for fans of, if you are a doom metal fan, a stoner rock fan, I think you definitely check it out. It isn't as dark. It doesn't have anything really dark on it per se. It's like in a Black Sabbath kind of way. It's more like heavy blues, but it's still pretty intense. There's still some pretty big riffs on it, right, and some pretty gargantuan, slow moving, for its time, some really slow moving stuff. There's nothing like fast or rocking or boogieing on this album. It's all big chords. It's all sort of slow moving type of big riffs and stuff like that. So it's a cool record.
Right on. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You hit on like that old tube amps and all that. That something about that era, and that's just what they had. You know what I mean? The tube amps, the big sweaty tube amps that you're going into with your Les Paul or whatever, and a big stack. And there's not a bunch of crap in this heavy 70s stuff for the most part. Yeah, they have distortion, a little bit of whatever delay and wah and all that, but this stuff is great when it's very stripped down and just freaking going for it. You know what I mean? When you get, for me, again, we get around to those power trios, that heavy blues style, and they're just like chugging ahead like a freight train, man.
Yeah.
And those amps are just smoking. Yeah. I mean, I'm a guitar player. So like you said, you're the bass player. You kind of listen to that bass. I'm listening to that guitar. I want to hear that tone. And that era, man, it doesn't get much better than that. And there's
he's got
not a lot
tone.
Really?
Just
Right
killer
on.
tone on this for sure.
And,
It's all
and
about sort of the tone.
there's not a lot to hide behind back then. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Especially when you're at that level, you're not Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin and all that. You're 3 or 4 dudes in a studio with your equipment, and what can you do? Let's do it.
Yeah, and it sounds like a microphone in front of an amplifier. The drums sound like it's like room mic'd, like maybe there are just a couple mics hanging above the drums. It's not like a real close drum mixed drum sound, kind of like they're in a
Right.
big room or something, which I think is really cool. So
well, it's like on this Hydra album, that second track I was talking about, man, the drum sound fantastic in that. Like if you really crank it up, the bass drum sounds great. It's got like a killer punch to it. It's just one of those, they hit it right, on that album. And they weren't a huge band by any means, but they got in there and somebody helped them out and they just really hit it right on that album.
cool. All right, there you go. There's our picks for this week. We'll leave some links in the description for you guys to check them out if you haven't heard them. If you have heard them, leave a comment down below. Let us know what you think of these bands. If you haven't heard them, go listen, come back, leave a comment. Make sure you check out Greeno on the Man Cave of Doom. I'll have a link down below for that. Yeah, and I'll also have my Spotify playlist, heavy 70s stuff. If you're on Spotify, you can like that and check out some of the bands I have on my playlist. All right. So I'd like to thank Greeno again for joining me here at The Lair. And until we see you next time, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.